The train hissed to a stop, and through the steam a woman descended, carrying a locked iron trunk no porter dared touch. The waiting rancher expected a meek girl with folded hands. Instead, Eleanor Voss met his eyes, set the trunk down hard, and said, "Before any vows, we discuss the deed." The whole platform went silent. Somewhere a horse stamped once, waiting. 3 weeks earlier, in a cramped Boston boarding house, Eleanor's aunt had pressed the marriage advertisement into her hands. "A home of your own at last," the older woman sighed. Eleanor read the cattleman's words twice, then looked up. "A home you cannot put your name to isn't yours, Aunt. It's a borrowed room with a longer lease." Her aunt frowned at such talk. But Eleanor folded the paper carefully, already certain. Whatever waited out west, she would not arrive owning nothing. Eleanor Voss had spent 26 years being useful to other people's households. Orphaned young, she had kept her uncle's ledgers, mended her cousin's linens, and tutored neighborhood children in arithmetic for coins that went straight into her uncle's tin box. She was clever with numbers in a way that made men uneasy and women suspicious. When her uncle died and the house passed to a distant male relation, Eleanor found herself politely, firmly, shown the door with one trunk and $40. The trunk was the only thing she truly owned. Inside it, beneath 2 dresses and a winter shawl, sat the things that mattered. Her late mother's account books, a small brass scale, and a leather folio of pressed wildflowers she had never shown anyone. She kept it locked not from secrecy but from habit. In a life where everything could be taken, a lock was a small act of ownership. The advertisement had come from a man named Cassius Hale, a cattle rancher in the Wyoming Territory, near a town called Bitter Creek. He wrote plainly. He needed a wife who could keep house, manage accounts, and endure hard winters. He offered honest work, a roof, and his name. He did not offer affection, and Eleanor respected that he did not pretend to. What the advertisement did not say, but Eleanor read between the careful lines, was that Cassius Hale was in trouble. A man advertising for a wife who could manage accounts was a man whose accounts had gone wrong. A man emphasizing honest work was likely surrounded by something dishonest. Eleanor had read enough ledgers to know that the truth lived in what people omitted. She wrote back a single page. She would come. She could cook, clean, and keep books better than any clerk he might hire. But she added one line that she suspected he skimmed past. "I expect to discuss the terms of our partnership upon arrival." He had wired the train fare. She took it as agreement. Now, rolling west through endless gold grass under a sky too big to believe, Eleanor pressed her palm against the cool iron of her trunk and rehearsed. She would not arrive as a purchase. She had been useful all her life and owned nothing for it. That ended at Bitter Creek. If she was to pour her cleverness and her labor into rebuilding a stranger's ranch, then the land would carry her name beside his, or it would carry no labor of hers at all. Cassius Hale stood on the Bitter Creek platform in a clean shirt he clearly hated wearing. He was tall, sun-browned, and tired around the eyes in a way that aged him past his 30 years. He had rehearsed a polite greeting. He had not rehearsed a refusal. When Eleanor set down her trunk and named her condition before hello, Cassius felt the platform tilt. Behind him, 2 ranch hands snorted. The station master pretended to sort mail. Heat climbed Cassius's neck. "You want your name," he repeated slowly. "On the deed to my land. Before we've even said vows." "On our land," Eleanor corrected, "if you intend for me to save it. Otherwise, I'm only a hired woman you needn't have married." She tilted her head. "And I think you married rather than hired, because hiring costs wages you don't have." His jaw tightened. She had hit something true. Cassius drove the wagon out of town in furious silence. The grass rolled past, the mountains stood blue and indifferent on the horizon, and Eleanor sat with her hands folded, entirely composed, which only made him angrier. "You don't know the first thing about ranching," he said at last. "No," Eleanor agreed. "But you advertised for accounting, not roping. I know everything about accounting, and I'd wager the thing killing your ranch isn't the cattle. It's the books." He said nothing, which she had learned to read as a yes. Send me back then, she offered lightly. Waste the train fare you can't spare, explain to the whole town that you couldn't manage a woman with a trunk, and start your search over while the debt grows. Or, she let the word sit, let me see your ledgers tonight. If I'm wrong about you, I'll sign whatever you like and keep my mouth shut and cook your supper. If I'm right, my name goes on the deed. That's not how marriage works, Cassius said. It's not how marriage usually works, she said. That's not the same thing. They reached the ranch at dusk. It was beautiful in a way that hurt. A low log house, a sagging barn, fences in need of mending, and beyond it grassland that ran to the foot of the mountains. Cassius's whole inheritance, his father's life, his own back-breaking decade. Eleanor understood at once why he clutched the deed like a drowning man clutches wood. To put another name on it felt like cutting off his own hand, but she also saw the worry in how he looked at the place, as though it were already slipping from him. Inside, over a cold supper, they circled the argument again. He called her demand outrageous. She called his situation desperate. He said no woman in the territory had ever asked such a thing. She said no woman had ever been able to dig him out of debt before. And he wouldn't know unless he let her try. Why does it matter so much? He finally burst out. A name on paper. Eleanor was quiet a long moment. Because I have worked my whole life inside houses that were never mine, she said. I have balanced books for men who threw me out the day they no longer needed me. I will not pour my last years into one more place that can put me on a train the moment I'm inconvenient. If I build something, I own a piece of it. That's all. That's everything. Cassius looked at her differently then. Not warmly, but differently. Show me you can read the books first, he said. That night, by lamplight, Cassius dropped 3 years of ledgers on the table like a challenge. Eleanor rolled up her sleeves, unlocked her trunk, and set her mother's account books and brass scale beside his. Then she began to read. She read past midnight. Cassius fell asleep in his chair. When gray dawn crept through the window, Eleanor was still awake, very still, one finger pressed to a column of figures, her face pale with the particular fury of someone who has found a lie hiding in plain sight. She woke him with a hand on his shoulder. Mr. Hale, she said quietly, you are not merely in debt. You are being robbed. These numbers have been altered. Someone has been forging your accounts for years. Cassius came fully, terribly awake. Her name was Dorothy Pickett, and she ran the Bitter Creek Mercantile with her widowed mother. She arrived 2 days later with a basket of eggs and an unmistakable curiosity about the rancher's strange new bride. Where the town smirked, Dorothy simply sat at Eleanor's table, watched her work the figures, and said, "You read those like other folks read scripture." Eleanor, who had no friends and had never expected one, found herself talking. Dorothy listened. By the third visit, she was bringing town gossip that turned out to be useful. Who owed whom, who'd bought land cheap, whose smile didn't reach his eyes. A friendship unlooked for took root. Eleanor went to war the only way she knew how, with paper, ink, and relentless arithmetic. The forged accounts were clever, she had to admit. Whoever altered them understood that Cassius hated bookkeeping and trusted the men around him. The fraud was not a single bold theft, but a slow bleeding. A few head of cattle lost each season that had actually been sold, freight charges inflated, a loan against the property recorded at an interest rate higher than what the original contract specified. Drop by drop, the ranch had been drained into someone else's bucket. I need every paper you've ever signed, she told Cassius over breakfast. Every contract, every receipt, every letter from the bank. Even the ones you threw in a drawer and hoped would disappear. Cassius, who had indeed thrown several such letters in a drawer, and hoped exactly that, fetched them with the sheepish air of a boy caught hiding a bad report card. Eleanor spread them across the table and began sorting them into stacks with the cool efficiency of a general arranging troops. Their days fell into a rhythm. Cassius rode out at dawn to the genuine work of the ranch, the cattle, the fences, the wells. Eleanor stayed at the table, surrounded by paper, the brass scale gleaming beside her like a small idol. In the afternoons, she walked the property with a notebook, counting things. She counted fence posts. She counted head of cattle and compared the number to what the ledgers claimed. She counted the boards in the barn, and the sacks in the feed store, and the entries in the freight log. The ranch hands found her baffling. There were two of them, a quiet, decent older man named Abel who had worked for Cassius's father, and a younger, smoother fellow named Royce who had a ready laugh and an answer for everything. Abel tipped his hat to Eleanor and stayed out of her way. Royce, she noticed, asked a great many friendly questions about what she was finding in the books. She gave Royce friendly nothing answers and watched his smile carefully. In town, the gossip ran ahead of her like a grass fire, the purchased bride who'd demanded the deed, the Boston woman who sat with ledgers like a man. Some laughed, some were scandalized. A few of the older women, Eleanor noticed, looked at her with something that might have been hope. The first real victory came at the Bitter Creek Bank. Eleanor walked in on a Tuesday with Cassius beside her, her notebook under her arm and her chin level. The banker, a soft-handed man named Mr. Sutton, greeted Cassius warmly, and Eleanor not at all, which told her something. She set her notebook on his desk anyway. "Mr. Sutton," she said, "I'd like to review the original loan contract on the Hale property. Not the payment record, the original signed contract." Sutton's smile flickered. "That's a complicated document, ma'am. I'm not sure." "I read complicated documents for pleasure," Eleanor said pleasantly. "We'll wait." It took the better part of an hour, and a great deal of stalling, but the contract appeared. Eleanor read it twice. Then she set it beside her notebook, where she had copied the interest rate Cassius had been paying, and pointed. "The contract says 6%, she said. "He's been charged 9, for 3 years," she looked up. "On a loan this size, that difference is over $400. Where did it go, mister?" Sutton, the banker's soft hands, began to sweat. He spoke of clerical errors, of revised schedules, of misunderstandings. Eleanor wrote down every word. Cassius, beside her, was very quiet. On the wagon ride home, he finally said, "$400. At least," Eleanor said, "and that's only the bank. We haven't yet accounted for the cattle." He was silent a long moment, watching the road. "My father trusted Sutton," he said. "I trusted him because my father did." "Trust is a fine thing," Eleanor said gently, "but it should be checked against the books now and then. Even the people who love us are sometimes weak, and the people who don't love us count on us being too polite to look." Something shifted in Cassius then. He looked at the woman beside him. This stranger he'd nearly sent back, who had been on his land barely a week and had already found $400 he'd given up for lost. "You really can read those things," he said. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close. "I really can," Eleanor said, and for the first time since she'd stepped off the train, she let herself smile. That night, he cleared a corner of the front room and built her a proper desk from spare barn lumber. He didn't say what it was for. He didn't have to. The desk changed something. It was a small thing, a few rough boards nailed level, but Eleanor understood its language. He had given her a place that was hers. She arranged her account books on it, set the brass scale in the corner, and pinned up a sheet of paper on which she had begun to draw a map of the fraud, with lines connecting names like threads in a web. The web kept coming back to one name. She didn't say it aloud yet. She wanted proof, not suspicion. So she worked. She and Cassius rode out together now, which scandalized exactly the people Eleanor expected it to scandalize. He showed her the land, where his father had dug the first well, where the spring grass came in greenest, where the creek ran year-round even in drought. She found to her surprise that she loved it. Not the way he did, born into it, but freshly the way a person falls for a thing they were never promised. The huge sky, the smell of grass after rain, the way the mountains turned violet at dusk. "I see why you'd fight for it," she told him one evening, the two of them sitting on the porch step. "I haven't been fighting," Cassius admitted. "I've been losing. There's a difference. You showed me that." He turned the brim of his hat in his hands. I'd given up, I think. Decided the debt was a weight I'd carry till it crushed me. Easier than looking too close. Looking close is the whole job, Eleanor said. It's the only thing I've ever been good at. That's not true, he said it quickly, then seemed surprised at himself. You're not afraid. Of anything. You walked into Sutton's bank like you owned it, Eleanor laughed. I was terrified. I've simply learned that terror and a level chin look the same from the outside. He laughed too then, really laughed, and the sound startled a meadowlark off the fence. Meanwhile, the investigation deepened. Dorothy proved invaluable. Over mercantile eggs and town gossip, she helped Eleanor piece together who had bought cattle cheap at the last 3 sales, who had suddenly come into money, whose name appeared on land transfers that didn't sit right. There's a man, Dorothy said one afternoon, lowering her voice though they were alone, named Garrett Woad, owns the big spread north of yours. Quiet money. Folks say he's been buying up failing ranches all along the creek for half what they're worth, right when the owners get desperate. Funny how they all seem to get desperate. Eleanor's pencil went still. Funny indeed. She began to pull on the woad thread. It unspooled beautifully and horribly. 3 ranches in 5 years, all along Bitter Creek, all swallowed by debt, all bought at a fraction of their value by Garrett Woad the moment they collapsed. And every one of them, she discovered when she rode to the county seat to examine the records, had banked with Mr. Sutton, and every one of them had employed at some point a smooth young ranch hand who had a way of being near the books. Eleanor sat in the dim county records office with the ledgers open before her and felt the whole shape of it click into place like a key in a lock. It was not bad luck draining these ranches. It was a machine, a banker who inflated the debts, a hand who cooked the books from the inside, and a wealthy man waiting at the bottom of the slope to buy the ruins. Cassius's ranch was simply next on the list. She copied everything, page after page, in her neat, clear hand until her fingers cramped. She did not trust the originals to stay unaltered now that she had been seen asking questions. On the ride home, she pushed the horse faster than usual. The sun was setting, the grass gone to gold, and her mind was racing ahead. She had the shape of it. What she needed now was a way to prove it that no judge could wave away, and a way to do it before Wode's machine ground the Hale Ranch into the dirt like the others. When she got home, Cassius was waiting on the porch with a lantern, worry on his face that smoothed into relief when he saw her. He came down the steps and took the horse's bridle. "You were gone all day," he said. "I was about to ride out after you." "I found it," Eleanor said, sliding down, her legs stiff. "All of it. Cassius, this is bigger than your ranch. And I think the man behind it is about to realize I know." His jaw set. For the first time, it set not in stubbornness, but in something like resolve. "Then we'd best be ready," he said. "Come inside. Tell me everything." It was the first time he'd said we. They stayed up the whole night by lamplight, and this time Cassius didn't fall asleep. Eleanor laid out the map of the fraud, every thread, every name ending at Garrett Woad. Cassius listened with his fists slowly clenching. "Royce," he said at last, the name bitter. "It's Royce, isn't it? The hand who's always near the desk." "I believe so. He's the inside man, the one who altered the ledgers." Cassius stood, paced, sat again. Then he did something that surprised them both. He took the deed from the locked box on the mantel, unfolded it on the table between them, and laid his hand flat upon it. "When we win this," he said quietly, "your name goes on it, not because you bargained, because you earned it." The trouble with cornering a machine is that the machine notices. Royce vanished first. He simply didn't appear for work one morning, and his bunk was cleared out, and the smooth, ready laugh was gone from the ranch as if it had never been. Eleanor felt the chill of it immediately. "He's run to Woad," she told Cassius, "which means Woad knows we're looking. We've lost the element of surprise. What came next came fast, the way a slope gives way all at once after the first stone slips. A man rode out from town 3 days later with a paper from the bank. "Mr. Sutton, it announced in cold legal language, was calling in the full balance of the Hale loan. Immediately. In 30 days, the entire debt was due, or the bank would foreclose and the property would be sold at auction to satisfy it. Cassius read it twice and went white. 30 days. We don't have a tenth of that money. Nobody could raise it in 30 days. That's the point, Eleanor said grimly. Woad means to force the sale before we can prove anything. He'll buy it at auction for a song, the way he bought the others. The foreclosure is the trap closing. The town, which had laughed at the purchased bride, now watched the Hale ranch the way people watch a house with smoke coming from the roof, with pity, with gossip, and with a careful distance lest the fire spread to them. Garrett Woad paid them a visit himself. He came in a fine buggy, alone, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache, and the unhurried manner of someone who has never once doubted he would get what he wanted. He tipped his hat to Eleanor with exaggerated courtesy and spoke to Cassius as though she weren't there. Hale, he said. Bad business, this foreclosure. Sorry to hear of it. A man hates to see his neighbor struggle. He let the false sympathy hang. I'll be at the auction, of course, and I'll make you a fair offer beforehand to save you the embarrassment. Won't be much. The place is mortgaged to the rafters, but it'll be something to start over with. More than you'll get from strangers. How kind, Eleanor said before Cassius could speak. To offer to buy a ranch you've spent 3 years draining at the bottom of a hole you dug yourself. Wode's eyes moved to her at last, and the courtesy in them cooled to something flat and watchful. I don't know what you mean, ma'am. I think you do, Eleanor said evenly. I think you've a banker who inflates loans and a hired hand who cooks the books. And I think you've done this 3 times before along this creek. The Mercer place, the old Donnelly spread, the Tully Ranch. All failing, all banking with Sutton, all bought by you for pennies. She smiled without warmth. I keep very good records, Mr. Woad. For one moment, the unhurried manner cracked and Eleanor saw the cold thing underneath. Then the mask returned to smoother than before. You're a clever woman, Woad said softly. Cleverness is a fine quality in a wife, less fine when it makes a person reckless. A woman alone out here, far from anyone. She ought to be careful where she rides. The creek country is hard on folks who go where they're not wanted. He tipped his hat again. 30 days, Hale. He drove away. Cassius was shaking with anger. He threatened you. Right to your face, He did, Eleanor said. Her hands, she noticed, were perfectly steady, which surprised her. Which tells me he's frightened. Men who are winning don't threaten. They simply win. She turned to him. But it also tells me we're running out of road. We have 30 days and a man with money and a banker and the law all leaning his way. Then what do we do? Eleanor looked at her map of threads and names, at the brass scale, at the deed folded on the mantel. We do the one thing he isn't expecting, she said slowly. We stop hiding what we know, and we find Royce. Finding Royce was Dorothy's doing in the end. The mercantile, it turned out, was the beating heart of all knowledge in Bitter Creek. Dorothy heard within a day that a smooth young man matching Royce's description had taken a room above the saloon in the next town over, paid for in cash, and had been seen flush with money he hadn't earned honestly. He was waiting, evidently, for the auction to pay out, and drinking away his nerves in the meantime. A frightened man who talks too much when he drinks, Eleanor mused. That's a man who can be turned. Cassius didn't like the plan. He liked even less the next part, which was that Eleanor intended to do the talking. He won't be afraid of me the way he'd be afraid of you, she explained. A man like Royce thinks women are harmless. He'll let his guard down. And I need him talking, not fighting. They rode to the next town together, Cassius waiting outside with grim patience, while Eleanor walked into the establishment's respectable front parlor and sent word up that a friend wished to speak with him about his future. Curiosity and perhaps guilt brought Royce down. He was not laughing now. The smoothness had gone watery around the edges. He sat across from Eleanor with the trapped look of a man who knows the bill is coming due. Eleanor did not threaten him. That was the mistake Woad would have made. Instead, she laid it out plainly, almost kindly, that she had the records, that the whole machine was about to come apart, and that when it did, the law would want someone to hang the blame on. Woad had money for lawyers, Sutton had position. And Royce? Royce was a hired hand with no money and no friends, the easiest man in the world to leave holding the whole crime alone. They'll let you take all of it, Eleanor said softly. You're the one whose hands were in the books. Woad will say he knew nothing. Sutton will say the same, and you'll be the only name left standing when the dust clears. She let it sink in. Unless you speak first, a man who tells the truth before he's made to is treated very differently than a man who's caught. I can't promise you escape everything, but I can promise that telling the truth is the only road that doesn't end with you alone. Royce's hands were shaking. Woad would, Woad can't touch you if you're under the protection of the law and the truth's already told, Eleanor said. But he can do anything he likes to a man still keeping his secret. It took an hour. It took Eleanor's whole patient, relentless calm. But in the end, Royce talked, and more than talked. He had kept, out of exactly the self-preserving instinct of a man who didn't fully trust his employers, a private notebook. In it, he had recorded the real numbers alongside the forged ones, and the dates, and twice a note of the specific instructions Woad had given him. Proof in the criminal's own hand, he'd kept it as insurance. He had never imagined he'd use it to save himself by confessing. Eleanor walked out of that parlor, with the notebook pressed to her chest like a treasure, and her heart hammering with triumph and terror in equal measure. But the road home held one more blow. When she and Cassius returned to the ranch in the failing light, they found the front room window broken, and the lock on the mantel box pried open. The deed was gone. Someone, Wode's doing, surely, had broken in while they were away and taken the one document that proved Cassius owned the land at all. Cassius stood in the wreckage, ashen. Without the deed, at the auction, anyone could claim, we can't even prove the place was ours to begin with. He's taken the ground out from under us. Eleanor sank into a chair. She had the proof of the fraud. She had Royce's confession and his notebook. But Woad had just stolen the single piece of paper that tied the Hale name to the land, and the auction was in 4 days. For the first time, looking at the broken window and the empty box, Eleanor felt the cold weight of real defeat. The next morning brought the worst of it. A second rider came from town with news that turned Cassius to stone. Mr. Sutton, in his capacity as banker, had filed papers at the county seat declaring the original deed lost or destroyed, and asserting the bank's lien gave it first claim to the property. With the deed gone, there was no clean record of ownership to fight the foreclosure. The auction would proceed in 3 days, and the bank, Woad's Bank, in all but name, would control the sale. Dorothy came that afternoon and found Eleanor sitting at her handmade desk, the Brab's scale before her, staring at nothing. I had every thread, Eleanor whispered, every proof of the lie. And he stole the one true thing. That evening, Eleanor walked out alone to the rise behind the house, where the whole ranch lay spread below her in the last of the light. The grass was going to gold and then to gray. The mountains stood black against a sky the color of a healing bruise. She had come west to own a piece of something at last, and now she might lose even the small place she'd carved at a handmade desk. She thought of all the houses that had never been hers. The boarding house, her uncle's home, every room she'd kept clean for other people, every ledger she'd balanced for men who showed her the door. She had sworn, stepping off that train, that she would never again pour herself into a place that could be taken from her. And here she was, having done exactly that, and worse, having come to love it, and the stubborn, decent man who'd built her a desk out of barn boards. That was the thing she hadn't planned on. The loving. She had meant to make a bargain, a clean transaction, her name for her labor. Instead, she had gone and let it matter. Cassius found her there in the dark. He didn't speak. He just stood beside her and looked out at the land they were about to lose. I'm sorry, Eleanor said finally. I promised I'd save it. You found the truth, he said. That's more than anyone's ever done for me. The truth isn't enough without the deed. Then, he said slowly, we'd better think harder, and something in how he said we lit a small, stubborn flame in her chest. Eleanor sat upright in the dark. The deed, she said, Cassius, a deed is recorded. When your father bought this land, the sale was filed at the county seat. The paper Woad stole is only a copy. The original record of ownership is in the county ledger, the same office where I copied all the fraud records. She was on her feet now. Sutton filed a paper claiming it was lost, but a claim isn't truth. If we produce a certified copy of the recorded deed at the auction, alongside Royce's notebook and the proof of the forged loan, Woad's whole machine falls apart in public. They had 3 days, and they used every hour. Eleanor rode to the county seat at first light with Cassius beside her, and did not stop until she stood at the clerk's counter. The original land record was exactly where she remembered it. Bound in the heavy county ledger, the Hale purchase recorded in faded ink the year Cassius was a boy. She paid the small fee for a certified copy, watched the clerk press the official seal into the wax, and held the warm document like something holy. A claim of lost meant nothing against the county's own sealed record. Cassius's ownership was, and had always been, a matter of public truth. That was the foundation. Now they built the rest. Eleanor worked through 2 nights at her handmade desk, assembling everything into a single clear account that any honest soul could follow. The certified deed proving ownership, Royce's notebook in his own hand, recording the real numbers beside the forged ones, and Woad's instructions. The original loan contract showing 6%, besides Sutton's payment records showing 9. The pattern of 3 other ranches, Mercer, Donnelly, Tully, all banked with Sutton, all drained, all bought by Woad. She copied it all in triplicate, neat and merciless, and tied each set with string. The last piece was the hardest, and it was Cassius's idea. An auction's a public thing, he said. Half the county comes to watch a man lose his place. Woad counts on shame keeping us quiet, on folks looking away polite, so let's not be quiet. Let's let the whole county watch the truth instead. So they sent word, through Dorothy and the Mercantile, which spread news faster than any telegraph, that at the Hale auction there would be something worth seeing. The morning of the auction dawned bright and cold. The county courthouse steps were crowded, thicker than anyone could remember. Ranchers and townsfolk and the merely curious, all the people who had laughed at the purchased bride, now drawn by the promise of a spectacle. The auctioneer stood ready. Mr. Sutton stood pale and sweating in his good coat, and Garrett Woad sat at his ease. In the front, the picture of a patient man about to collect what he'd waited 3 years for. When the auctioneer called the Hale property and asked whether there were any objections to the sale, Eleanor stepped forward. "I have one," she said, and her clear voice carried across the whole crowd. Woad's expression flickered. He had not expected her to make a scene. He had counted on shame. Eleanor did not shout, she did not accuse. She simply began to read, calmly, precisely, the way she read everything, and laid each document on the courthouse table for all to see. The certified county deed, proving Cassius Hale owned the land outright. The bank's claim of a lost deed exposed as a convenient lie. The loan contract at 6% set beside the 9% Sutton had charged for 3 years. And then, into a silence so deep you could hear the wind in the courthouse flags, Royce's notebook, the real numbers, the forged numbers, and the instructions in Woad's own employ, naming the cattle skimmed, the freight inflated, the slow bleeding of a good man's ranch. And it was not only this ranch, Eleanor said, turning to face the crowd rather than the officials. The Mercer place, the Donnelly spread, the Tully ranch, everyone banked with Mr. Sutton. Everyone drained until the family broke, and everyone bought, the moment it failed, for pennies, said the same man. She looked at Woad. He is not your neighbor saving you from ruin. He is the ruin. And he had a banker and a hired hand to do the quiet work, while he waited at the bottom to collect. The crowd had begun to murmur, and the murmur was turning like weather, into something with an edge. Sutton broke first. He was not a brave man. Brave men do not forge ledgers. And faced with the certified deed and the notebook and 300 neighbors' eyes, he began to babble, to distance himself, to say he had only followed instructions, that it had all been Wode's design. In trying to save himself, he confirmed every word Eleanor had spoken. A man rode up then, the county sheriff, sent for quietly by Dorothy the evening before, who had been standing at the back listening to the whole of it. He was a fair man with no love for Garrett Wode, and he had heard enough. He placed his hand on Wode's shoulder. Wode rose with the cold composure of a man who still believed money would save him. "This is a performance," he said to the crowd. "The hysteria of a woman who—" "The county clerk sealed that deed himself," Eleanor said. "The contract is the bank's own. The notebook is your hired man's. I am only the one who read them aloud, if that is hysteria, mister." "Wode, then you have been undone by a woman reading. I find I can live with that." A ripple of something went through the crowd, and then, astonishingly, someone laughed, and then more, and the laughter was not at Eleanor now. It was at Garrett Wode, the quiet money of Bitter Creek, marched down the courthouse steps by the sheriff while the whole county watched. The auction was halted on the spot. The foreclosure, built on a forged debt and a false claim of a lost deed, collapsed like a barn with its posts kicked out. In the weeks that followed, the inflated loan was struck down to its true and honest figure, a sum the ranch could carry. The cattle skimmed over 3 years were accounted for, and a portion recovered. And the families of the Mercer, Donald, and Tully ranches, ruined by the same machine, found in Eleanor's careful triplicate, records the proof they needed to seek what was owed them. But the moment Eleanor remembered longest came 3 days later, quiet, with no crowd at all. Cassius brought her to the county clerk's office. He laid the certified deed on the counter and asked the clerk to record an addition to it. Then he turned to Eleanor, turning his hat brim in his hands the way he always did when his heart was full and his words were short. "Your name," he said, "on the land beside mine, not because you bargained for it, because there's no version of this place that's mine without it being yours, too." Eleanor, who had balanced 100 ledgers and never once been moved to cry over a column of figures, found her eyes stinging at the sight of two names recorded side by side. "Equal halves," she said. "Equal halves," he agreed, "in the land. And the rest of it, too, if you'll have me." She would. A year later, the train hissed to a stop at Bitter Creek, and a young woman descended carrying a single trunk and a marriage advertisement folded in her glove, anxious and alone the way Eleanor had once been. Eleanor was waiting on the platform, not as a purchased bride now, but as half-owner of the largest honest ranch on the creek, there to meet the new school teachers she'd hired. She took the girl's trunk herself. "First thing," Eleanor said, smiling, "let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Whatever you build out here, make certain your name goes on it." Behind her, Cassius lifted a hand in greeting, and the grass ran gold all the way to the mountains, and every honest acre of it was theirs, together.